So what one witnesses in Germany under the Nazis is both the collectivization as well as the atomization of society, concepts that don't necessarily seem to go together, but believe me, they did. From labor unions to social clubs, German social life was atomized. The Nazi Party infiltrated virtually every social interaction. And indeed, people increasingly spoke less openly, less freely, as this kind of net starts to pull in on them. Even within the family, children were encouraged to report on their parents if they heard something subversive. Again, the breakdown between the public and the private gradually becomes the norm in Nazi Germany. What one said at home, obviously what one thought, if you expressed your thought at the dinner table, this became important. One obviously could get in trouble for objective crimes, what you have done, but you could also get in trouble for what I would say are subjective crimes, what you're thinking, and that was quite ominous. And to add to this, the laws were often applied retroactively, an especially pernicious development in Nazi Germany. If one were a social democrat in 1928, you could be elected, or rather arrested in 1938 for anti-community opinions. You could be interrogated, you could be harassed by the Gestapo. And as noted, neighbors and family members were encouraged to inform on one another. Nobody has done better work on this than a historian in America named Robert Jagiellonian. He's a professor at Florida State University who has written a book on the Gestapo in German society. It was not necessary, in other words, for the Gestapo to have a wide net of employees. People were willing to inform. Now, in addition, within the Nazi hierarchy, at the lowest rung of the ladder, you had somebody who was called the Blockwart, or in plural, the Blockwärter. This was an individual who had responsibility either for a building or for a block, ensuring conformity within this very small domain, ensuring that the flags were out at appropriate times, for example, Hitler's birthday, but also ensuring that people had their radios turned on, the Volksempfänger, during Nazi speeches. For example, if Goebbels were giving a speech and it was being broadcast, you had to have the radio on. And so this was a way of ensuring conformity. People could be arrested for anti-community minded behavior, for not having that radio turned on. And if you were arrested, you might be taken to Gestapo headquarters for 1 or 2 hours, but the impact was devastating. And so one didn't express themselves too openly. You certainly didn't express rage too openly, even in your family. Now, this system of terror is very well represented by the playwright Bertolt Brecht, probably the most famous playwright coming out of the Weimar era. After fleeing Nazi Germany in 1933, he wrote a series of vignettes that were put together in a book called The Private Life of the Master Race. And one of those vignettes is entitled Spion, or Spy. And what it features is a mother and a father talking over breakfast with their little boy with them. And the father is complaining. He's complaining about the inability to eat butter in Nazi Germany. Why is he always forced to have margarine? And he makes some comments such as, you know, I thought that, that life was going to be much better in the glorious Third Reich, that Hitler would provide. And his wife simply responds, you know, quite pragmatically, I just can't find it in the store. And little Fritz, we'll call him Fritz, he's sent off to the store at some point to, let's say, get some milk. And the parents continue to talk, and the father continues to harp about the inadequacy of one thing or another. And little Fritz doesn't come back. And he doesn't come back. And then finally, the father says, you know, where's he gone? He's had plenty of time to get to the store and back. And then more time passes, and then he says, what were we talking about when Fritz left? And his wife says, you were talking about the inability to get butter in the Third Reich. And the father then is horrified. You can imagine, he says, I wasn't complaining, this wasn't really a serious discussion, I'm true to the Fuhrer, but the tension mounts until sometime later, little Fritz comes back, and I think he went to buy some candy or something. He was dawdling as, you know, a boy of maybe 10 years of age could possibly do. But the impact of this vignette is clear. Many Germans looking back on the Third Reich don't recall overt fear, don't recall consistently looking over their shoulder for the Gestapo, but they do recall kind of an internalized fear, a subconscious fear. One did things certain ways to avoid trouble. One went through the motions. One put out the flag, one turned on the radio. In German homes at this time, you could maybe turn on the radio, place it next to the front door, open the window a little bit, and go to another room in the house and close the doors and not have to hear the speech. And the Blockwart would walk by and simply check off your name that you had the radio on. So what you often found, and I think this is indicative of it, is internal immigration, leading intensely private lives with really abnormal social interactions because it was so difficult to have normal social interactions. Many people were, of course, committed Nazis, but the Gestapo reports, something that was called Stimmung der Bevölkerung, or voice of the people, suggest that the Gestapo really didn't believe this. What the Nazis counted on was not so much ideological commitment, but apathy. People, you know, each atomized person looking out for number one, not bothering to take the next step. If you have misgivings, if you have worries, if you have concerns, it's impossible to find reinforcement. You couldn't confide in friends. There was little organized discussion outside of official Nazi supervision. Somebody would inform if you said something that was out of place. You might tell a joke one evening in a bar, and there were any number of jokes going around that were superficially, at least, hostile to the regime. You know, I'm a great Aryan. I'm blonde like Hitler. I'm tall like Goebbels, who was a little pipsqueak, referred to as the poisoned rat. Or I'm lean and lengthy like Goering, who was so fat he couldn't see his shoes. You might tell this joke one evening and get away with it. Everybody will laugh. And on the second occasion, you might get a knock on the door at 2 in the morning and be taken down to Gestapo headquarters. So there was unpredictability. There was insecurity, which was key. People left with no key points of orientation that were outside of National Socialism. Now, as this is happening, there's a very positive public display by the Nazis of what's happening in Germany. You know, law and order have been restored. Economic stability has come, and there's really great promise for the future at this point. Political stability, there's no more clashes in the streets. There are no more battles going on with communists. The class conflict that had plagued the Weimar Republic was over. The Nazis had in fact created what they referred to as a Volksgemeinschaft, a people's community, probably better translated as a racial or an ethnic community. Everything was folks something. You had the Volksempfänger for the new radio that everybody was supposed to have. People were no longer called Mr. and Mrs. or Herr and Frau, but they were called Volksgenosse, people's comrade. And then, of course, in 1937, the Volkswagen was introduced. Everybody should have one of these cars. And so this concept of a community, of a society, becomes very crucial.